we were going to have a panel on space policy at this point in the program, as you can see in the agenda. But a number of the people that I had planned to have on the panel have left the conference early. So instead of having a panel where a number of us sound off and argue with each other and maybe have time for a couple of questions, why don't we have this panel be you?
You can.
Okay. Okay. And okay. So the question at hand is, what should be NASA's path forward? What should be the next major step in the space program? Okay. I've advocated Mars production. We have the idea of doing a two-person Mars flight mission as a way to get things off the ground, break through the ice. We have Mike Griffin was here yesterday and said, the moon base is the key step because we need to become a spacefaring nation, and a spacefaring nation would not neglect the moon. And so to Mars by the moon. And undoubtedly there are other views as well. What's yours? All right. Yeah.
Robert, I've been coaching for the last few years, and one of the things that we first asked in the coaching session, and since this is a group, is a quintessential basic question. And I know it's a broad question, but the question is...
Here's a microphone.
Thank you.
But I'd like you to address the question that I've asked.
Okay. Well, the question first is, you put out a lot of broad areas, but the first question we ask a client is, what do you want? That's a very important question to answer. We know what you want, okay, but what do you want?
Where's the right?
Okay.
All right. I'd like people. Okay. I've asked a question. I don't want to have a discussion of methodologies. I want to have a discussion of policy. So I'd like to have people discuss what should the space program be doing. What is its path forward? So why don't people line up over there and take the mic?
Dr. Zubrin?
Over there. Someone will be good enough.
I'm just going to hold it. I'm not going to.
Yes.
You just hold it.
Or is this a better one to use?
This is fine.
Probably about this.
This one may use. Here, this one has.
They're about the same.
Oh, they do? Okay.
Yeah, they're both kind of over there.
All right, let's go.
I want to address both the what would I like to see and what do I think might make more sense. I'd love to see Mars direct, but frankly, I did find Dr. Griffin's statements appropriate. I mean, this whole issue of what is a spacefaring nation. The flyby, the materials we saw on the flyby last night, very interesting, all of that. But some of his points that he made about going back to the moon, I have to give him credit for that. You just don't leave it behind. Is it a necessary next step? When do we go back to the moon? Those are tough decisions, but I do think it's intimately tied to that idea of a spacefaring nation and that whole notion of the cislunar, control of, as it were, the cislunar lake, as he called it. And I think that's a legitimate approach, so I will support that one.
Okay, everyone. Going back to the days of Marx and Engels, there was a little two-word phrase that is very relevant in German and English. The first word is real, and the second word is politic. P-O-L-I-T-I-K. Okay, and you never deal in theory or ideology. You deal in what is real. Like in World War II, Stalin asked a rhetorical question: how many divisions does the Pope have? Okay, and what I'm getting at here is whatever we want to do and everything like that, we have to ask that real hard-nosed question: what's going to pass through the Congress and all the bureaucracy and all the special interest groups? And what we have is a lack of will. Sadly, a lack of will. And in my mind, the only thing that works is getting a really viable commercial space industry going, and that the first mission to Mars is like a Canadian movie I saw in 1999. It was all privately financed and with $10 billion worth of TV rights and everything like the Olympics or something like this. Now that's, you know, it's cheesy, it's unprincipled and everything like that, but it's, in my mind, it's what's probably going to work.
Of course we can't, of course we want to do the moon, but a moon settlement cannot stand on its own. There are just too many things missing that are critical. I want to see us homestead the solar system, but the easiest place to do that kind of thing is on Mars. And it makes it so that we're going to develop the transportation as well. No, we need, so we need to design it. We don't want to have a design for the moon and then another design program for Mars. We can do them both with the same equipment. So we need to design and start doing the moon. And I think one of the things we'll need both for the moon and Mars is a habitat that we can really depend on. Now, I really like everything you do, Dr. Zubrin, but I really think that the habitat needs to be launched 2 years before we take it to Mars. And then we can know what the health effects. We can spin it for 6 months at lunar level gravity, and we can know what months on lunar level gravity does. So we can spin it for 1.5 years on Mars level gravity, and then we can know, and it shouldn't be a separate module. It should be the same module that then we're going to take to Mars. Or we can put it on the moon if we want to go there and do significant things there. Anyway, we need to, I think we need something that is mature. Then we can know what the health effects are. We can know what parts, spare parts we need. We can have a maintenance schedule on it. We have something that we can really, it's only a few hundred miles and whatever. It's something we can do so we can maintain it. We can know what we had to do to maintain it.
All right, so test out the hab first.
And then use that same.
Well, those are all good comments, and I generally agree that having a testing schedule and kind of working out the kinks on these things in LEO on the moon might be a good idea. But what I'd like to address in a little broader, or not broader, but further out range, and I feel I can do this because I'm, young and idealistic. Anyway, the thing is, the way I see it is that just as the federal government and state governments fund basic cutting-edge research, the kind of research that is too risky, too blue sky, too open-ended for there to ever be a good business case, NASA is in that same realm. NASA needs to be on the bleeding edge. The thing is that we've done the moon 50 years ago, about 50 years ago, and as Dr. Zubrin has said in the past, you're not going to excite the next generation by replicating what their grandparents did. So NASA needs to go to Mars, NASA needs to go to Europa, NASA needs to go to Titan, NASA needs to go to Enceladus. The private companies know that we can go to the moon. Ergo, the private companies can do cislunar space. I agree that NASA should help them with technical expertise, because NASA's done it, but nobody else has. NASA can provide maybe some material help, but primarily the companies can take care of that. NASA needs to be on the bleeding edge, taking us to places we've never been before. That was, I think I can let somebody else go for a while, and then if you want me back, you can say encore.
I think we need to concentrate on getting the cost down because NASA is so expensive these days that, you know, it just can't afford to do anything. We need to have more competition. We need to use Space Act agreements and fixed price contracts instead of the cost plus contracts. I disagree quite a bit with what Michael Griffin said yesterday about going back to the moon. He was advocating a permanent settlement on the moon. At the same time, he was advocating the same kind of architecture that Constellation used, essentially. And that just won't work. It's just so expensive that we'll never get to Mars. We'll just get stuck on the moon if we do that. So I really think that, well, I think we need to develop reusable vehicles. We ought to have a competition to do that with the private, you know, commercial in the same way that we did the commercial cargo and commercial crew. And I really think that would help a lot. As far as what our next step should be, right now we just can't afford, you know, anything grandiose like a permanent base on the moon. I think that we ought to go with like an asteroid in its native orbit as the next step.
I'll try to answer this in the general and the specific. Generally speaking, I agree very much with what he said about cost-plus contracts. We need to move away from that mindset. I want to see more collaboration between NASA and private enterprise, possibly even, you know, international private enterprise. I don't know. But the point is that cost-plus, you know, in the long run is deadly to us. I also wish we could figure out some way to decouple NASA from whatever party is currently in Congress and whatever president is currently in the White House, because that's a very short wavelength, and NASA projects need to operate on a much longer wavelength. We need to think 10, 15, 20 years in the future rather than 2 or 4. Now, as far as budget goes, let me state the obvious. NASA could use more money. In the reasonable, you know, foreseeable future, it's not going to go up by a factor of 10. I think it might go up by a factor of 2, you know, if we can somehow swing that. And I think if it did, now I'm shifting more to the specific, we tend to look down on certain projects because we look at the limited pot of money there is involved, and we think of it as sort of a zero-sum game. I'm very much in favor of pursuing multiple goals at once. And I strongly agree with Dr. Zubrin, as he said, that NASA needs to be goal-driven, and the fact that it hasn't been is why we've been floundering for 40 years or so. I hope I paraphrased that right. Anyway, if we can get more funding, then we can stop infighting so much. You know, let's by all means have a manned mission to Mars. You know, I would accept that as our top goal. You know, let's also build an orbital fuel depot. Let's build a base at Shackleton Crater to mine water and other volatiles. Let's let's build a small wheeled space station, not just for research, but to test the effects of partial gravity on human beings, and so on and so forth. Let's move out in 4 or 5 different directions, I would say.
I don't want to get into too much detail about my ideas because it's all on YouTube, and as far as the conference this year goes, but I want to get down to the core of what I've seen with this whole issue after following this for about 10 years, is that we have a lot of incandescent light in something like this, and especially in academia, where we have a lot of ideas running in random directions. And what we need is coherence. We need things going in the same direction. I identified about 20 or 25, 30 major challenges or objections that are always put out there for Mars in one of my talks. And I was basically saying, let's try and focus like a laser on each of those things and knock those things down like dominoes. I see the biggest enemies of anything with deep space exploration and settlement are what I call the pearl clutchers and the rent seekers. And on the one hand, you've got the people who say, I'm sitting on a couch and I don't want to be made to feel bad by sitting on a couch, so I'm going to keep you from doing anything with your life. And that's the attitude of, oh, the cosmic rays are too bad, or, you know, it's the snow day analogy that Zubrin keeps giving. And then the opposite is the, oh, you want to spend $1 billion on a spacecraft, how much of that can I get into my wallet? And those are the rent seekers who are like constantly trying to grasp at everything. So we need a policy that handcuffs the grasping hands and muzzles the pearl clutchers over on the fainting couch who do not want to deal with any of this stuff and get, you know, it's the static, I hate to quote Ayn Rand, but the get out of my way attitude. Beyond that, what do we have in terms of technologies that are viable commercially early? That was the SpaceX approach. Let's make the minimum launcher that can do something because we've never built a launcher before. Let's build it in a very modular status. Okay, we've demonstrated we can build a launcher. We will use NASA as a customer, but we will not put them as the only egg in our basket. We will do commercial as well. We will survive without NASA if they get to that point. It's a critical intermediate stage. It's a nest to grow in, but we can't regard the nest as, you know, you can't stay in the cradle forever, and we can't stay on NASA's budget forever as a spacefaring culture, just as the airline industry couldn't stay within the FAA forever. You know, eventually things have to be deregulated. Eventually things have to pay for themselves and you know, get out of their parents' basement. So I think that's the approach we need to do, is what are our targets and what are the things we can do in the near term that are commercially viable to pay for themselves, so that we're not expecting, you know, we're not constantly going hand in hand to the taxpayer and expecting the next election cycle to pay for these things. There was a great genius speechwriter back in ancient Greece who said, you know, he was a genius, so as a speechwriter, so therefore he made a lot of money. So he was brilliant and he was rich. And they asked him, what is it better, to be brilliant or to be rich? And he said, it's better to be rich because the genius will always wait at the door of the rich. And we're the geniuses waiting at the door of the tax, you know, of the tax payer when we're dealing with NASA. We can't constantly be that way. We've got to use some of this genius on our own to build something else. Something that is not entirely dependent on the taxpayer.
Just two brief things. Based on the assertion of becoming a spacefaring species, I think the most important thing that we need to develop is some way of making sure we can mitigate cosmic radiation. Now, that's going to require some investment, and it's probably, to any space vehicle, there's probably going to, right now that we know, there's going to be a certain amount of mass involved with that, but I think that's one of the most important things in order to accomplish that ultimate goal of the spacefaring civilization. And then I think we already have enough information on micrometeoroids, probably between Earth and Mars, and probably in the solar system generally, to figure out probably a standard type of shield, you know, Nextel, the multi-layered. it'd be nice to maybe do a study on that. We can get that answered, but we have to continually work on radiation mitigation issue. But that's, hopefully we can do that as part of it.
Thank you.
This is something that's been on my mind for quite a while. I know that the perceived answer to my rhetorical question, but I feel like it bears vocalizing anyway. In the last 8, 10, 12 years, how many government programs have exceeded 20, 30, 50, and a couple programs $1 trillion? And with now the industry experts are now saying that the trip to Mars and back or just to Mars could be done in less than $20 billion now. Why doesn't the president just issue an executive order and say, Hominis Bombus, here's the money, go? I mean, it just seems that easy.
Well, he has to want to do that.
Yeah, there you go. That's the problem.
No, I don't want to take the microphone, but it's,
Please,
you need a president who would want to do that.
But they also
No. President Obama has issued an executive order that's going to cost the country $1 trillion in terms of shutting down the American coal industry. That's going to destroy $1 trillion worth of assets. It's questionable whether it's constitutional, but he's doing it, and because he wants to do it. If you have a president that wants to order a human Mars program by executive order, and I'm actually not entirely sure I'd like to see that be the way it's done. I would like to have a president that makes an executive order that tells NASA within its budget to focus on sending humans to Mars, as opposed to simply appropriating money. But nevertheless, we need to elect a president who's going to want to do something like that.
But are they all doing that?
No, he said he was going to cut the space budget before he got elected.
My interest in getting to Mars, or my main interest is for us to get to Mars as soon as possible. I'd like to see it while I'm still here. I'm one of those NASA people, or retired. And in fact, I flew Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. I didn't fly them, but I'm part of the team that planned and flew them. So to me, it's important to start doing something now in terms of bending metal, not just studying. Of course, I like the direct way that you've done, Bob. But in terms of getting started now, I think it suffers from not inventing here. It's going to have a rough time doing it, in my view, getting started. I was influenced a lot about what Mike Griffin had to say about returning to the moon. So I don't want that to go necessarily first, but I do think that we need to get back there and do some of the things he talked about. So, and this is a recent thought, I think probably Inspiration to Mars is the thing to do. What we need is a spark. And right now it's hard to get anybody interested in what's going on. So what we need is some kind of spark just to start it. It may not be what we really want in the end, but I think that would do it. And I think it's the most realistic thing that actually could happen in a hurry. I mean, we do have an SLS, whether you like it or not, being built. We will do the job. And as I think Bob even pointed out last night, the President said that's what it's supposed to do. And what NASA ended up implementing is not doing that. So there could be some way to possibly turn him around if NASA and other people point that out to him to do that. So, so my choice for that is not because I think that's our end goal that we want to do, but I believe that would get us started. But it would cause a spark that would get the whole nation interested in this idea that we're the leaders, and then we've got to follow up with something. And with Mike in charge, it might have been to go lunar, but now that the thing that started the spark was by flying by Mars. It might be easy to say, now we really got to go ahead and go land. So just from the practicality and likelihood basis, I think that's really the way to go.
Before you leave, I'd like to ask you a question. Do you think that something like a return to the moon is necessary to restore NASA's confidence, its courage, sufficiently for it to embrace humans to Mars?
No, I don't think that's even a problem. When you talk about NASA, you talk about NASA, the agency at headquarters that's under the direct thumb of the president. But there's NASA, like all the guys who work there, who are, you think you're enthusiastic about going to Mars, those people, us, are maybe an order of magnitude more interested in getting there. That's why we're working there. So there's no lack of courage about going to Mars. So I think that
not in the working troops, but perhaps at the middle level. I mean, I certainly see that whenever Humans to Mars is proposed, NASA at the upper levels always comes up with, well, why don't we do something else first? Anything else?
Well, maybe it's because a lot of them want to go to Mars. So that's a good thing. I do, again, I want to go to Mars, but I do think that the overall thing about making us a spacefaring nation, there's a lot of truth in it to really get down to the nitty-gritty, since you can go back and forth to the moon quicker, and there's the possibility of minerals and other resources. That could be useful. But I'd still like to see us perhaps do the Mars exploration, that excite people, and go do a Mars landing. But then it does take a lot of things to start a colony there. Maybe stop at that point, then do a little bit more lunar stuff, develop things, and then go back to colonize.
I think that what Dr. Griffin said about making us a spacefaring nation, maybe through the moon, maybe through, ideally through Mars, I think we need to start harnessing the popular culture. I think we need to start getting people talking about that in politics, in media, on the internet. I think Mars One, even if it doesn't get off the ground, it's done so, and it'd be fantastic if it did, it's done so much to just get that conversation started again. I think we need to start harnessing the spirit that was going on in the Apollo, because my generation, we weren't around, we weren't alive. We don't maybe know what that feels like to be part of a nation that's going places, that's doing things, that is exploring space. And I think we need to start, I think people often accuse my generation of teens and 20-somethings and 30-somethings of being the entitlement generation, and I think you can say there's some truth to that. So what you need to do is you need to make us feel entitled to go to space. You need to make us feel... that it is our right, that it is our social responsibility to expand beyond this one gorgeous planet, that you need to make us, you need to capture the imaginations, and you need to instill a sense of hope. Because right now there can be a lot of cynicism, there can be pitting groups, demographics against each other. You can take this idea that we are a species that is so much more than what we are right now, that we can do great things, and you need to instill that in every one of us. You need to get people, the people as a whole, excited, hopeful, optimistic, feeling that we can do this, that it's something that's real, it's practical, it's not science fiction, it's science, it's fact. It needs to be a social movement. And I mean, if we're the entitlement generation, we're also the movement generation. We have marches, we have protests, we have angry internet forums. You harness that, you get people excited, you get people talking about this, you get people to elect the people who will support this. You get the next voters, the next business owners, the next scientists, the next engineers, the next writers, the next artists. You get them all focused on this one idea, you implant it into the population so that it becomes part of us, of who we are, who we're growing up to be. And that's how you get the world into space. That's how you get the world to Mars. That's how you get the world to the asteroids, to the moons of Saturn, Jupiter. That's how you get us beyond what we are. That's how you get us to grow as a species and as a civilization.
To what she wants to say, I think that one of the reasons that Elon Musk and SpaceX is so popular is because the few people he does touch, this is what he's getting. But he's not getting it. There are not enough people thrilled about that. But there's one thing that I think on the surface NASA should be doing. And I think and I heard, now they're talking about doing it halfway, and that's in situ fuel production. But they just want to go and make oxygen to bring back, or to bring them back now. What? It's not. It's almost the same thing to make methane as just to collect and process oxygen. So I think that's foolish. Just why not finish it?
I've been doing some looking ahead only 3 years to 2017, and it turns out that there will be a solar eclipse on August 21st of that year. That's a Monday, cutting right across the continental states from Oregon to South Carolina, and it will go right through Cheyenne, Casper, Wyoming. Turns out that that's where the largest convention city, the convention facility in the whole state is. So I'm thinking, why not just do two things at once? Have Mars 20, and the next day we have the solar eclipse given to us for free. Make a combined missions. Why not? And I've already started to look at some pricing, and it appears to be reasonable. And
it will be total except for on.
yes, it will be. In Casper, it will be total for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. I've already checked it out.
All right, but we're not in shape to plan our convention in 2017 yet. I don't buy being bananas. That's, you know.
Even so, it should be looking at do two things at once.
All right, well, we'll think about it in 2016 whether we want to do that.
When I watched the moon landing 45 years ago, I thought by the time I graduated from university, we would be on Mars. Instead, we've seen about $750 billion in today's money spent by NASA since then, with relatively little to show for it. Occasionally, there's been a worthwhile program like Cassini or the Mars rovers, but the reason for that, I strongly agree with Dr. Zubrin, is the lack of a plan. They are individual little projects here and there. They're not coordinated. They're not part of a plan. We need a plan. The only plan that seems to make sense to me is sending humans to Mars as a unifying effort. Now, whether that's in 10 years, in 12, or in 15, I think one can debate, but it's definitely not in 25 or 35 or 40 years. And that should be what the efforts of NASA should be put behind. In the meantime, what do we do? In addition to sending science packages to Mars, we send packages to Mars that do the kinds of things we saw in the rover competition, practical tasks that will have to be accomplished by humans on Mars. We can test materials to see which materials can survive best in the harsh conditions on Mars' surface. We can send instruments made out of titanium and other materials to see which ones work best. We can drill for water. We can see if we can find water ice a couple of meters below the surface and how that can be utilized, rather than just doing exclusively things that are of more abstract scientific importance. Now, should that be the only thing NASA does? Not at all. Even during the 60s, we did things other than Apollo. We even sent an unmanned probe to Mars. This does not mean shutting down our planetary robotic exploration efforts. it probably means not having a permanently manned moon base unless we get an increase in funding. I strongly support a permanently manned moon base. I think it's a no-brainer. Today, people are scratching their heads. 150 years ago, there could be a debate whether it was worthwhile spending $7 million to buy Alaska. People thought it was a waste of money. People accused the administration of being wasteful with the taxpayers' money. What a good deal did that turn out to be? Same the purchase of Florida earlier in the 19th century. Establishing a moon base makes a lot of sense strategically and in the future economically, and we should do it. But if we do it in a $17 billion NASA budget, it'll suck out so much money to set up the base and maintain it, it will delay us getting into Mars by a decade or two or more. So it is not a precondition, it is something we should do in addition. Other things we should be doing in the meantime are things that can be done for relatively small cost compared to NASA's budget that would lead to lowering launch costs in the future, which I think is an essential element of becoming a spacefaring civilization. Let us test out the technological possibilities of things like the space elevator. Can we push material science to the point that that becomes feasible? Maybe we can't. But right now there's no serious effort for testing that. Let us test out the possibility of future solar power satellites. If that is a technology that can be made to work, it would lead to a huge lowering of launch costs by an order of magnitude or two, because of the tens of thousands of material we'd have to send up just to build those. They will probably be built with private money by utilities, but we first have to prove out whether the technology and the science support the feasibility. Those are things that do not cost in the billions of dollars. This is research that can be done while we pursue the primary goal, which is humans to Mars in a reasonable time span, and that's before the end of the next decade.
Obviously, I share the general, common belief in humans to Mars as soon as possible. But as a more sort of narrow just comment, I just want to say I think the Red Dragon, Mars sample return mission seems worth advocating to me because as soon as possible, the near-term possibility, it's compatible with the Mars sample return agenda, which I've heard from NASA guys is what's being pursued. It's compatible with the commercial spaceflight agenda, and what we get out of it from the human to Mars perspective is an order of magnitude increase in Mars EDL capability in the hands of Elon Musk, who's obviously a Mars advocate. So I don't know, just a random thought, but I thought it would be an interesting next step if the Red Dragon mission happens. So, do you have any? What do you think of that? Sorry.
Well, the Red Dragon sample return mission?
Yeah.
Well, the Dragon the Dragon is not yet a Mars landing system, and it also doesn't include a Mars ascent system. So there's an awful lot of development that would need to happen before the Red Dragon sample return mission would occur. I didn't hit it that hard, but I hit it a bit in the debate on Friday night. I don't think that the sample return mission is the right mission for the robotic Mars exploration program. If they're going to be spending, by their own numbers, $3 billion on this sample return, okay, the MER rovers cost $400 million each, and that included development, which doesn't have to be done now. It'll probably be, $200 million each now to build. Okay, so for $3 billion, you could do 25 of them. Whatever, 15. Sorry. Or 10 of them and 5 orbiters, and this and that. And I mean, Mars is a huge planet. There's lots of places to explore. And there's also, I mean, I got to tell you, there's literally scores, if not hundreds, of new instruments that people want to bring to bear on Mars. And, I found it interesting that, Scott Hubbard, who is a significant player in the officialdom of decision-making in the Mars program, he says, well, everything you said was said by others. We had dozens of people line up and tell our committee those sorts of ideas. And yet we decided to do sample return. Now, wait a second. I wasn't claiming originality for my ideas there. Okay, the fact that they had dozens of people line up and tell them that they had this idea and that idea, and they basically shut them all down for a unitary decision to do sample return. And even, the Mars 2020 rover, okay, it has 1/3 the scientific instrumentation of Curiosity, even though they are the same rover. Why? Because 2/3 of its payload capacity is going towards caching samples. So we're losing 2/3 of the in situ science capability of the Mars 2020 rover so that it can pretend to be collecting samples for a sample return mission to come at some later date. And since, by the way, a precision surface rendezvous cannot be guaranteed, whatever ascent vehicle they send to the Martian surface at that later date will have its own smaller rover to collect samples for it anyway. So, they basically, with the program as scheduled, other than discovery missions like Maven and InSight, which are coming into the program through the side door, in terms of the mainline program, the only thing it's going to accomplish is to, aside also from what it's already done based on the diverse and robust program of varied rovers and orbiters and so forth that have been launched up till now, okay, is collect a sample and bring back a kilogram or so of material from Mars. I don't think that's what we should do. I think we should be exploring lots of places on Mars, prospecting it for resources, bringing new instruments to bear, bringing new kinds of creativity to bear in lots of different ways. And when it comes time to get a sample, when we have humans on Mars, they won't return 1 kilogram of samples, they'll return 300 kilograms of samples, and they will have been selected from thousands and thousands of samples from around the planet. Why are you sending everybody away?
Because it's 15 till we've got time for one more question. Yeah, wait,
Yeah, I know, but it's not free.
One more person asked a question before. I kind of
Okay,
want to
please.
respond.
All right, anyway, so that is what it is. Anyway, all right, so why don't we take this? Okay, well, respond.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify what's going on. I was not trying to advocate Mars sample return exactly. It's more of a pragmatic, if we're going to do Mars sample return, if that's what's going to happen, it should be the Red Dragon.
No, I don't think so, actually. If you're going to do a Mars sample return, and this is another objection I have to the current program, okay, we could do a Mars sample return, okay, and the Curiosity landing system could land 1 ton on Mars. And with 1 ton landing on Mars, we could land a fully fueled 2-stage ascent vehicle with a small capsule capable of sending it directly from the surface of Mars on trans-Earth injection to a direct entry at Earth and be picked up by a plane off or a helicopter on the chute or on the ground. And this is doable. If these people were serious about a sample return, instead of doing it in 3 launches, they could do it in 1 and get the job done. No, Dragon is way over-designed for a sample return. And I like Dragon. Dragon is part of a human mission architecture. If you want to do sample return, you can return a kilogram sample in a small capsule this big, and I've answered your question. Let's take the next question. I'm not terribly interested in sample return, but if I were to do sample return, I'd like to do it in the most efficient way possible.
My comment wasn't really about sample return at all. It was about accelerating the development of Mars EPL capabilities for SpaceX, so that stuff like Mars 1 can actually happen in a reasonable time.
All right, next question.
Okay, I'd like to answer both questions very briefly. I'm a plant scientist from San Diego, and I work with relatively highly intelligent people. I'm also from the Bay Area, from San Jose, where there's also another group of highly intelligent people. I think one of NASA's biggest problems is when I go out and have a conversation with projects in space or to Mars, is Does NASA exist anymore? Hasn't it closed down? You guys are talking about such details, and I can't even have a conversation with people. They say it's going to take so much money to start up something like NASA again. You know, so just to give you some perspective.
All right, so we have a space agency, but we don't have a space program.
No, they doesn't
no, I think there's some truth to that statement, yes.
She's right. You go out into the public and an untenable number of people think we have no space agency at all. We have no access to space. It's dead.
Well, yeah, but that's because it's plain dead. Now, we're going to have to wrap up. Let this gentleman ask his question. Okay. And then I'm going to make a final statement.
Real quick, we're talking about how we would change NASA's policy. If I was king, I know what I'd do, but there's only a certain space of NASA policies that are reasonably achievable given the bureaucratic economic realities that we have now. So what NASA policy would I institute that would be realistically achievable? That would be a lot of Mars rover missions that are concentrated on gathering information and science that is specifically related to a manned mission on Mars. So two quick possibilities would be send a rover to try to determine the ideal spot for such a mission, and one that could potentially demonstrate water mining on Mars.
Thank you. We're going to close shortly. So I'm just going to make a few final comments to reiterate a few things that I said last night. We're presented with a very interesting situation. Certain capabilities are emerging. Falcon Heavy may well fly next year. Okay, next year. And the SLS is looking at its first test flight, 3 years from now. Orion will be test flown the first time this fall. Okay? So these things are happening, some capabilities are emerging, and at the same time, perhaps much more decisively, the world situation is changing. And I can't say that I favor the way it is changing. I don't. And I saw this coming last fall when I went to Russia, where I met some very fine people who really are people of talent and goodwill and would love to work together with the West and with America and open the way to space for humanity. But I also met some other people. Merchants of hate, really, is the only thing you can say about them. And I saw this place was on the edge. And follow world developments, you know what's going on right now. We're heading towards confrontation. We're heading towards a new Cold War. I think that, I wrote an article in USA Today last fall saying, let's go together to Mars. And I wrote it then, Carl Sagan put forth the same idea in the 80s as a way to end the Cold War. I put it forth last fall as a way to try to head off a new Cold War. But events have overtaken it. And there's going to be a new Cold War. And this now puts the space program on the spot in a way that it hasn't been. Okay? It should have been put on the spot to do exactly what I said, to prevent this situation from happening, to draw Russia into the West. But it wasn't. So now it's going to have to be put to work the way it was in the 60s to make the West prevail. Okay? It's going to have to be put to work once again to show the world what free people can do. Okay? To make it clear which society and which way of life really shows the path to a good future. Okay? You know, we're going to have to once again astonish the world with what free people can do, just like we did in the 60s with Apollo. Well, we've got the chance right now, you know, to do this Inspiration Mars mission. Recast is a 2021 mission. It's a better trajectory. The hardware will be available. Everything is there to do it. And, I mean, you want to astonish the world? How about sending humans to Mars? Let's do it. Thanks.